We are heading toward fall, which means pumpkin spice lattes, football from peewee to pros, baseball playoffs, holidays, and hopefully cooler weather. You know what it's also time for? It's time for you to join my Patreon group. That's right. For as little as $1 a month, you can support this podcast. If you go $5 a month, you get access to early episodes and unedited episodes. So please, if you can, throw a couple bucks toward me, like these wonderful people. I want to thank Sean Poole, Dave and Jennifer Edwards, Kimba Wiggins, Jeff Ulmer, Sylvan Groth, Liz Brunson, Yetta, Steve Van Sack, Rob Parneck, Randy Flood, Ted Canova, Crystal Carroll, Bella Pori, John Munson, Alex Simona, Alex Goddard, Betsy Hodges, Levi Petrie, Elizabeth Brunson, Stephen Malio, Holly Mack, Steve Rogers, Dale Hozak, Terry Smith, Anna Lynn, Chris Bloom, and Mary Thomas. Thank you guys for supporting me month in, month out. Your support makes the difference. So, okay, let's get back to talking Bruce. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are probably getting off the Bruce train, but since my guest is from Jersey, there's a good chance it's going to come up. This is a setup. I won't call it a blind date, but Bob Harrison and I have a mutual friend who sent an email, and Tom Zoller, friend of the podcast, designer of my logo, said, Bob, Jesse, I think you two would have a fun conversation. Go with it. So, Tom, all the credit, Bob, or he gets all the blame. Welcome to Set Lusting Bruce.
I usually blame Tom for everything.
It is. That's what you get for being that tall and that handsome.
Yeah, it's Tom and I don't take pictures standing up usually. I'm very particular about that
Yeah.
because I'm about 5'5" and Tom's 6'4",
Yeah.
and usually we've gotten to the point in our relationship where I'm like, we're out together and we take pictures and stuff, and I'm not taking him standing up. And he was on a panel with me this past weekend. And we took the picture. I'm standing right next to him, and he's a full like shoulders and head above me. And it's funny. We get a little older. We have friends, we have people passing a little bit more frequently, and it's something that you want to be aware of
Yeah, it
and
is.
taking those moments.
It absolutely is. And as we lose Cassidy, right? Just recently.
Yeah, I did a memorial to him yesterday at Baltimore Comic Con.
Hmm.
It was tough. I was asked to host it because I do a lot of the programming at Baltimore Comic Con,
Yeah.
and immediately thought of certain people, friends of his, like when it happened. John Cassidy, for those who don't know, is a brilliant artist, revolutionary, inspiring art. He drew my favorite all-time comic. Like I love a lot of individual comics and I love a lot of
Yeah.
different things, but the most perfect comic series ever to me is Planetary.
Yeah.
And I never really got a chance to meet John because he was too unapproachable to me. So that's those things we in life where we need to like, if you have the opportunity to meet somebody, you should take that chance because you never know when you're not going to have it.
Yeah.
But yeah, hosting that was important. We had some great people on. We had Scott Dumbier, who was his editor. We also had Albert Moy, who is his art dealer. We had Joe Ryband, an editor at Dynamite. We had Heidi McDonald, who is a well-known industry figure in both journalism and as an editor. She was an editor for him. And his good friend Jimmy Aquino, who's also a podcaster in his own right. So it was good. It was sad. It was funny. Tried to
Yeah.
take advantage of those moments. But yeah, it was a tough day.
Yeah. Jimmy's been on the podcast a couple of times. He's been nice enough to invite me a couple of times. And in fact, when the listeners to put a connection, so my son and I are flying to New York because Bruce is doing a show. This was in 2016. He did a series of 3 shows at MetLife Stadium, and my son and I had tickets for a night two, and so we flew in early, and we met Jimmy for dinner.
No,
I
that's
had never met
fantastic.
Jimmy in person, and so we got to go meet Jimmy. We got to talk. My son got to meet him. We just had a great time. We split a great steak at a steakhouse, and Chris was like, "Man, a guy living in New York, we're eating a New York steakhouse. We are living life, Dad." So yeah, that's great. Talk about, obviously you're involved a little bit in the comic business. So before we get to your origin story, why don't you give your elevator pitch to the audience?
I want to thank you for having me on, and please excuse me because this is the first time someone's actually interviewed me, so I appreciate that, and I want it to be out there. So thank you for doing that. I am an editor and podcaster and comics journalist. I've been a comics fan my whole life. I think I learned to read on comic books. I definitely know that I'm a better reader and writer because of comic books. And I started going to shows again in 2014 and started talking to people and made friends. And I I'm the host of the Pop Culture Squadcast, which we have live on YouTube on Tuesday nights. I have a regular audio podcast that you can find on the normal podcasting platforms called the Pop Culture Squadcast Interview Edition. I also edit for popculturesquad.com, which is our main website, and I write for that as well. I have a column called Continued After the Next Page, but it's a lot of fun. My podcast partner is Mike Gold, who was the founder of First Comics, and we have a lot of fun because I can probably spend about 3 hours a night talking to Mike Gold for the next 2.5 years and not get through everything with him. So we do about a half an hour of Mike and I talking about current activities, and then we usually have a pretty cool guest and spend an hour and a half talking on Tuesday nights. So
I can imagine. I'm thinking of Matt Donnelly is the co-host of Penn Jillette's Penn Sunday School. And Matt's been nice enough to be on the show a couple of times, and he says, "I can't believe I just get to sit to talk to Penn Jillette for an hour every weekend." And there are people who would just do that anyway. And so I imagine Mike has a lot of stories.
um, Mike has a lot of stories. That's fair. He has about 5 different lifetimes that he's lived in his 74 years. And he is family to me.
Hmm.
I care about him as I care about any other member of my family. My parents are both alive, thank goodness, but
Yeah,
he's a second father to me. And his daughter, head bitch in charge at Culture Squad, is technically the owner of the organization, is a sister to me. It's a lot of love at our little squad.
that's wonderful. All right, so let's go back to your origin story. Where did you grow up?
All right.
And what were you mentioned, were you a big, was your family a family of readers, and were they into music?
I grew up in I was born in Livingston, New Jersey, which is in Essex County, but I lived in Morris County for the first 4 years of my life. And then I moved down the shore. So I lived in Ocean County from like age of 6 till about 14. And then I moved back into Morris County with my dad. My parents separated. My parents are not readers. Actually, my dad's a reader now, and that he's 76 or 77, more than he ever was in his whole life. But they were into music, both of them. My dad was a little bit more on the what we used to call hard rock, like classic rock music,
Sure.
and also some doo-wop stuff. My mom was a Beatlemaniac when she was the perfect age to be a Beatlemaniac. She like was 13 in 1964. And they were both really they liked music a lot. So then I spent my whole first 30 years in New Jersey. I went to college there. I ended up working in New York City for a while. For about 12 years, I worked in New York City. And now I'm in Baltimore, which is weird. My current wife was actually my very first date when we were 13 years old. And when we were about 41, we found each other again. And so now we both live here in Baltimore as a couple of Jersey transplants. But growing up on the Jersey Shore, Bruce Springsteen is a native son. Whether you like Bruce's music or not, he's just part of the mythos of living there. Um, so you just grow up loving the music. I might be jumping ahead here, but I want to talk about when Bruce became important to me. His music was always there.
Bob, you obviously are a very good host because my next question was, so Bob, can you remember when you first you talk about, and I often make this joke, if you grew up in Jersey, saying when did you discover Bruce Springsteen is like asking when did you discover your parents used Tide, right? It's
Right.
just it's always there. But is there a road to Damascus moment where he became more than that guy?
Sure. Like I said, just to follow on that, he had just a few weeks ago or last week, I think, he showed up at the Stone Pony,
Yeah,
and as he has done probably hundreds of times. But it's like the 50th anniversary of the Stone Pony, and that's crazy to me. It just seems like the Stone Pony has been there forever.
yeah,
I can't believe it's only 50 years.
yeah,
And I was in high school, and you get to that point in high school where you're like, I want to know more about what this thing's, you want to pay more attention to the things that you like.
sure.
And I got Greetings from Asbury Park, and I listened to it a lot.
Mhm.
And I will, I, I feel like I'm always in the minority on this. To me, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey is his greatest album. It is the greatest lyric lyricism that he did. That if it was just a book of poems, would have been something that is taught in schools.
Yeah,
And so it was then I didn't have to read them. I just listened to them and learned them, and
yeah,
I know them all. And there's a line in Spirits in the Night where it's like early on, it's like, it's a mile down on the dark side of Route 88. And I used to live on the dark side of Route 88. I know exactly where he's talking about. And it's interesting. So that was the thing. And I want to give you a kind of interesting story about life and music and stuff. About 6 or 7 years ago, I had, I'd reconnected with a bunch of people through Facebook and stuff. I went through some times where I was disconnected from a lot of my history. And I'd reconnected with some friends from high school, and one of them lives in Chapel Hill or near Chapel Hill, and I have to often travel down to Durham to do some work.
okay,
And so I said, "Hey, why don't we get together and have some dinner or something?" And we did. And he was a very good, we were very good high school friends. We were part of that same group. We just haven't seen each other since high school.
sure.
And I said, Jeff, every time I hear Girl Like You by the Smithereens, I always think of you because you taught me that the Smithereens were cool and you taught me that music. And he said, every time I hear Lost in the Flood, I think of you because you taught me about that song. Listen, that the lyrics in that song are ridiculous,
Yeah,
but it was just so cool to have that thing where you don't know sometimes how much you have meant or the impact you've put on someone.
yeah.
So that was totally crazy. Nuns run bald through Vatican halls, pregnant with bleeding immaculate conception. How do you beat that as a 23-year-old?
Yeah. So Baltimore was just this weekend, right?
Baltimore Comic Con just
Yeah,
finished this weekend. Yep.
yeah.
That was the weekend before.
Okay,
So it was great. It was my first Bruce concert, first time I've ever seen him in my life. I've never had the opportunity when he toured that built up the live album and the live box set, the 85 live box set.
yeah,
I was too young. And then I don't remember having the ability to tour when he did the double album set,
okay,
the two single albums. And then I just wasn't in an opportunity. This was such a great chance. He was supposed to originally be at Baltimore Comic Con in Baltimore last year, and he got sick and canceled the rest of the tour. It was supposed to be the Saturday night of Baltimore Comic Con in Camden Yards in the buildings right next to each other, which I wouldn't have been able to go to because that's the night of the Ringo Awards, which is something that I always go to.
right.
Another former guest of yours, Ron Mars, was coming to Baltimore specifically because he was going to take advantage of going to see Bruce at Camden Yards.
Yes.
And that got canceled. And when the rescheduling date happened earlier this year, I jumped on it and I got seats. And I texted Ron and I'm like, here are my seats. And he's, here are my seats. And we'll meet up. And by the way, he says hi. I did tell
Thank
him we
you.
were going to be on this. We had dinner on Thursday night this past week. And I said, hey, I'm
Hmm.
going to be on Jesse's show. He's telling him I said hi
Yes.
because we were sitting at opposite ends of this long table. And
Yeah,
all of a sudden he yells across, he's like, hey, how was the show? Because we were both there. We just didn't get a chance to see each other.
right.
And it was fantastic.
Yeah. Uh,
It was my first show,
yeah.
and it was breathtaking. Absolutely.
Yeah, there was a lot of angst of long-term fans that last year he didn't change up the set list as much as he used to. But I've talked to a lot of people that only made one show.
Mhm.
And I say this with love in my heart. If you go to multiple Springsteen shows, it's first world problems that you're
Sure.
not getting a diverse set list. I had a buddy who from the UK was at the See Now.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah. And he said that was the greatest show I've ever. He said that he says I've gone to all of them and because he did so many from that first couple albums, like the idea
Yeah.
that this is where I wrote it and I'm sharing it.
So now I'm jealous.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Because at Baltimore, it was such a great show. I was cheating a little bit because Setlist FM is a brilliant thing that didn't exist until the internet or whoever. But I was watching to see what he was playing, so that I was prepared because I know there's a bunch of his newer stuff that I wasn't as familiar with, and I wanted to
yeah,
make sure that I knew what it was going to be. And he had been playing Seeds to lead off the shows.
yeah,
And when he was in Baltimore, he walked out on stage and started playing Hungry Heart in
yeah,
Baltimore.
yeah.
And just he didn't actually sing the first verse. He just put the microphone out
Right.
to the stands,
Yeah,
and that was insane. And he played some great songs. He didn't play any songs from Greetings from Asbury,
yeah,
which is fine because
yeah,
there were so many great ones.
yeah. So Nugs, I'm sure you're
Mhm,
aware,
mhm.
you can download the show and I've downloaded and listened and he Um, and my buddy Mark, who was there, said at the end, him and Steven often do a little shtick. You look
Yeah,
tired, Steven. Oh, I'm tired.
yeah,
Are you
yeah.
tired, Bruce? I'm tired. Well, this group looks tired. And they said, he goes, you on the beach. Are you tired? Are you on the boardwalk? Are you tired? And it was just the idea that all the stuff he had written back then, 55 years ago, 50 years ago, was just crazy.
It was a great show. It was the songs were great. He was great. The band was terrific. It's
Yeah.
crazy, not only just him, that all these guys are still doing it, other than the two.
Yeah.
And then if anybody hasn't seen him now, and if you are going to see him soon, I'm not going to, you might want to pause or mute for a minute, but I'm going to let you know. And I'm sure during 10th Avenue Freeze Out, he gets to a point and he's walking around the stage and he stops and points to the crowd and says, "This is the important part."
Yeah.
And then he does the line, and the big man joins the band,
Yeah.
and all the video screens are just pictures and videos of Clarence and Danny Federici. And man, I want to tell you, Jake Clemens is a hell of a sax player.
Yes, he is.
And you cry. I knew going into the show I was going to be crying, but I also lost my voice and sang the hell out of
Yeah.
every song.
So, a couple things. My mom died last month,
I'm
and
sorry to hear that.
we were at the funeral, and my son stood up and um, gave a really lovely talk. And then I gave my eulogy. And so, one of my closest cousins, Ricky, went up and, we're from Louisiana, so he's got that southern. And he goes to Chris, you were good. You weren't your daddy. You were good.
That's fair.
You're good, Jake. You're not Clarence, but you're good. Uh,
Listen, he's real good.
the first tour after they had lost Clarence was right after Wrecking Ball.
Mhm.
And the first show was a live from Sirius XM broadcasted at the Apollo Theater. And during City of Ruins, he's going through and naming the band. And
Mhm.
he's gone through everyone, Bob. And he says, are we missing anybody?
Oh God.
And the crowd goes crazy. And he said, are we missing anybody? Crowd goes crazy. Are we missing anybody? And he says, all I know is if you're here and we're here, they're here. And I'm tearing up just now.
Sure. Sure.
And
That's
you
yeah.
and you think about whether it's Baltimore, Dragon Con, Comic Con, name your favorite convention. And that first time where you don't see someone you loved, not seeing George Perez, right? And you
Hmm.
go, but I always think of that. If we're here, you feel that spirit. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's, as we said, it's, we get to that point where, you lose people more often than you want, and you got to keep them going.
Yeah,
And I'm looking at the set list while we're talking, and
sure.
just remembering some of the stuff that happened at that
Yeah.
moment. The night shift cover, which I know he's been doing on the tour, was so wonderful. And I got a complaint though, because see this
Okay.
thing over here, they do this set list FM and they tell you what's a cover and what's whatever.
Right.
And they always list Because of the Night as a Patti Smith group cover, and it pisses me off.
Every time.
It pisses me off.
You are not alone in that, my friend.
Listen,
Every Springsteen fan just goes, "No."
because okay, so here's the thing. I love Natalie Merchant's version better.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I
Um,
agree.
I will also say, and here's my one other. I think the band's version of Atlantic City is actually better than Bruce's version. However, in terms of covers that he's done that actually covered, I cannot believe that he did not write Jersey Girl. Waits' version is fine,
Yeah.
doesn't compare to Bruce's version. And there was a song that was should have come from him, right?
The story I made, there is Sarah Hickman is a um local Texan musician, and she did a cover of We Are Each Other's Angels.
Okay.
And it sounds like her, but it was written by Chuck Brodsky. And the other one, because I'm a child of the 70s, Barry Manilow didn't write I Write the Songs. It was
Yeah,
Bruce
yeah, sure,
Johnston for the Beach Boys.
sure,
So you're like, how did Bruce not write Jersey Girl?
sure.
Did he do it that night?
No, he didn't. He did Because the Night, which
Yeah,
was great because I don't think I've, unless it's a live show, live recording somewhere, I've never heard
yeah,
him do it because he never actually recorded it.
yeah.
No, it was great. I'm just looking at this now though, and I feel even a little bit more cheated because he was supposed to do Spirit in the Night and he replaced it with Darlington County, which I can't complain. It was great, Darlington County, but I did miss that
Well,
Greetings from Asbury song.
so now that you brought it up, I will tell you my seed story.
Seeds. Seeds kills me every time. I was ready for Seeds to lead off and to just be a
Yeah.
bundle of tears the entire time, but go ahead.
So the first time I saw him in Houston, he played Seeds, and because there's the Houston Town lyric in it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I adore the song This Is Your Sword from High Hopes.
Okay.
Not a very well-known song, but it's a gospel song. I just really love that song. And I was at the Houston show during the High Hopes tour, and it was on the set list. This Is Your Sword starting. And as they're walking on stage, Tom Morello goes, "Hey, we're in Houston. Scratch This Is Your Sword," and does Seeds.
Sure. Sure. But
Yeah,
what's funny, again, that's the point. Like I was thinking, I told my wife when we were driving into the city, because we
yeah,
we live 10 minutes from Camden Yards, and I'm
yeah.
super, super lucky about where we live and everything is there. Because getting into Baltimore is just crazy. Because like I said,
Okay.
I grew up in Jersey. So I grew up in which is not South Jersey.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Northern Jersey, Morris County, and stuff like that. So I am a New York guy. I'm not a Philadelphia guy. You wouldn't know this, but there is a very big difference between South Jersey and North Jersey.
Okay.
You find that out when you go to Rutgers and it's all Jersey people, and you half of them are from South Jersey, and you realize how much they love Philadelphia, and you're like, what's wrong with you?
Okay. Fair enough.
As we were driving in, I said to my wife, I should have, I meant to go and just like Google through the catalog because I wondered what, if there's any, I couldn't think, was there any songs that start with Baltimore or have Baltimore in it? Because there's so many Jersey ones. And every time he says Jersey in the stadium, in the
Yeah,
thing,
sure.
everybody screams, right? Uh, I hadn't thought of Hungry Heart until he started playing it. And I'm like, right there it was.
Yes. That's a tradition that started years ago. The story, and apocryphal maybe, but is that one night he forgot the lyrics and the crowd sang it. and since then
To
it's
Hungry
kind of
Heart.
been it's been a tradition.
I didn't even know that. That's
Yeah,
fantastic. But like
yeah,
the that's cool for you to know, but anybody who didn't know that and was sitting in the crowd just felt like such power that
yeah,
you were leading it for him.
awesome. Um, wh there was a years ago, and I wish I could remember who did it. I could Google, but for April Fool's Day, someone did a column that said Pulitzer Prize winning Bruce Springsteen has a new book out. And basically, they took every one of his albums and made it into a book. And then had a one-line summary about his collection of poems, his
Yeah.
family drama, right?
Hmm.
And I think there is an alternate universe as we talk comic world, right?
Sure.
Where Bruce is a Pulitzer Prize winning writer.
I think he's one of my favorite writers, and I
Yeah.
think I can say that.
That's what Ron talks about.
We touched Ron's a great guy, but we didn't get that super deep.
Yeah.
And I think I told him about how I felt about Greetings from Asbury, and he agreed with me.
Yeah.
But the Nebraska album is crazy.
Yeah.
I wanted to share this on the show because I thought about
Please.
it. There's a couple of things. One thing was just to get back to this before I forget. I didn't write this down in my notes that I wanted to get to was one of the cool things about being at the show was it's close enough to Jersey. Uh, one of my other friends from high school, someone else who I haven't seen since 1990, we've been Facebook friends for about 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And I posted a picture of my wife and I at the show, and she responded, "You're here, we're here too." And she still lives in Jersey. We should definitely meet. I'm like, yeah, after the show, meet me under the team store from out on Utah
Yeah.
Street. And we did, and we got a picture, and I hugged her, and we walked her to the car, and she was there with her family. We haven't seen each other since we graduated from high school, probably in June of 1990. We've been friends for a long time, and her son, lives down here now because he goes to college at Towson. So it was just crazy. And then we posted it on the thing, and another friend of my wife and I, who we went to Hebrew school with, who stayed close to one of my other cousins, and she lives about 15, 20 minutes south of us here, was also at the show. And just so many people that were there. It was great. One of the things I wanted to get to was you talked about how music affected my family when Bruce became important to me. He did. But there's two things about Bruce as I thought about talking, or would I be useful in talking to you? A couple of things. One, I had my first drink uh, as an adultish
Hmm.
while I was listening to Bruce. My dad and my parent, I was living with my dad when I was in high school. I had graduated from high school, so I was 18. It was the summer right before I went to college. I was going to Rutgers in about a week and a half. We had vacation. We went up to the Poconos, and it was horrible. We were up there for a week, staying in a cabin, and it was raining almost every day. And it was my dad and my stepmom and our little family. It was my dad, my stepmom, me, and my brother, who was 10 years younger than me. So I was 18, he was 8. And then my stepmom's brother and his wife and their kids who were younger than my brother, and my stepmom's sister and her husband and his daughter who was 5 years younger than me. So like it was an 18-year-old, a bunch of grown adults with children, and a bunch of little kids. So
Sure.
I did not want to be there. I wanted to be with my girlfriend,
Yeah.
and it was raining and it was crappy. And so one night, all the kids were sleeping, and I was still up, and we were playing the box set because it was what, 90. So we were playing the 85 box set, and the river was on, and they were all drinking and dancing in this rented cabin. And I just went and grabbed a beer, and I'm like, I got nothing to do. And my dad looks over at me, he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm having a beer." And he's like, "All right."
That's a great story.
The other thing about the river is in my life, I had some tough times with my relationship with my father.
Yeah.
And there was a time when I was listening very closely to the story behind before the river on the box set. And when those words, "that's good," are said, I lost everything. I broke down in tears and cried and cried. My relationship with my dad is a lot better now,
Yeah.
but even to this day, it doesn't have to be that particular for me to
Yeah.
cry when I listen to that. Music's always been something that kind of is touchstone to me in my
Sure.
life. When I was in college, I had a class and it was a super easy class. It was psychology of abnormal psychology with a focus on love. Super easy. All you had to do was come to class and write a paper and you got an A. Didn't have to be good. You just had to write the paper and hand it in. You're getting an A. So the only requirement was to come to class and read The Road Less Traveled, the book by Scott, I think his last name is the author. And you had to write a paper on a relationship in your life. So I chose
Okay.
my dad, something
Yeah.
you wanted to improve. And I faced it in phases.
Yeah.
And phase one was I touched to Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. Because when I was a kid, I just want to be like my dad. Like that was a little thing.
Sure.
And I don't think he quite got it. I don't think he liked it because he knew more of the sarcasm in the song. But when you're a kid, you're just like, oh yeah, I want to be like my dad. And that was it.
Yeah.
And then we hit a point in our lives when it wasn't great. I was in college and I had a bad night with him. I don't know if he remembers it that way, but it hurt me really bad. And the second song was No Son of Mine by Genesis.
Okay.
I felt that. I felt it hard. And so this class was senior year. My 21st birthday, my then girlfriend, who would then be my first wife, we drove from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin to Atlantic City straight through. And this because we were going to meet my mom, and it was my 21st birthday. And her uncle had given us a mixtape of all of these folk songs and whatnot. So we're driving straight through that straight, un, unforgiving Indiana and Ohio in the middle of the night. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and one of the songs comes on, and this song comes on I'd never heard before, and it's the last game of the season by David Geddes.
Okay.
You familiar with it?
Yes.
So for those who aren't, because most people aren't, there's a song about a young kid who loses his dad was blind, and because his dad was had passed, his father could now see him.
Right.
And when that happened at 5 o'clock in the morning, I like had to pull over because I
Sure.
lost everything. I was defenseless to that song. And at that moment I decided I wanted to fix that relationship with my father.
Hmm.
So music is important for me that way. And Bruce is important for me because of those things that he says, those stories that he tells you, the story that he tells before seeds. He understands the human spirit. He understands the delicacy, fragility of humanity, where sadness meets us. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I had a similar feeling. I had a difficult relationship with my father and mother. It was in the 2016 when Bruce was doing the river completely, right, from front to beginning. And he played Independence Day as one of the songs.
Mhm.
And he started talking about it that it's two people that love each other and just don't know how to share it. They don't know how to say it. And I was struck by that he wrote that as a young man, and now he's singing it probably from the age that was even older than his father at the time. And the idea that you're the flipping of that was very touching to me.
Sure.
So yeah, it is powerful. Though I will tell you a funny story.
All right, let's do that.
So I'm listening to The Wish about his mother,
Mhm.
right? And when he talks about on Broadway, he shares that she was fighting Alzheimer and she could not remember him sometimes. But I was listening to The Wish and I was struck by the feeling that I'm still lucky enough to be able to pick up the phone and call my mother.
Hmm.
So I call my mom and I'm almost crying, Bob. Oh.
Yeah.
And my mom's, what? I don't understand. What? It's a Christmas song? And I was like, just, how you doing, Mom? And I switched it.
Yeah. It's amazing. There's plenty of other songs by other artists that
Yeah.
have those same times of touchstones for me, and I don't know why that is. I, I've done a lot of therapy and I've done a lot of work that's helped a lot, but I never talked about that. Whether it's in it, music and comics are both the same way. There are
Yeah.
like I have very clear connections to certain comics and images and panels in my mind that I know where I was there or I know how this made me feel. Do you can I go into something a little bit on comics related?
I was gonna ask you, do you remember? And I'm horrible because I'm always amazed that people go, "Oh, Justice League blank blank was my first comic." I can't
New
remember.
Teen
I
Titans
just
number 4.
okay. See, I'm not that guy.
I'm not as good as others are,
Yeah.
but I do remember reading New Teen Titans number 4.
So I grew up. My I was blessed enough that my grandmother managed a post exchange, which is basically like a Target, a department store on a military base. And I would get up in the morning with her, would drive to work, and I would go to the spinner rack and I would pull
Nice.
every comic I wanted, would bring them to her office. She would rip the covers off
So they're immediately returned,
so
right?
that she could give the covers
Awesome.
to get her credit
I
back
know how this
and
works.
give me all the comics without the cover.
So I
So
get
that's
that.
all I can remember. That is, so I don't remember any of them except I remember that is one of my earliest of falling in love with the legions of superheroes and Jimmy Olsen becoming these strange creatures and Lois
Elastic
Lane
Lad.
looked beautiful. I was always a DC guy because Marvel did more of a continuing storyline and
Well,
because
Marvel
I
also wasn't on the racks. There was much less
yeah.
Marvel on the yeah.
And so but okay, that's my origin story. Please tell me yours. I'd love to hear yours.
Comic origin story is my aunt. Like I said, I grew up on the shore. My
Yeah.
aunt owned a corner store, like a little delicatessen on Sumner Avenue and Central Avenue in Seaside Heights, New Jersey. And
Okay.
if you don't know where Seaside Heights is for your listeners, when Hurricane Sandy came and hit the Jersey Shore and there was that roller coaster that had fallen off the pier into the water, that's Seaside Heights.
Okay.
So my first job was working there. I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning on Sundays and put the newspapers together,
Okay.
which was a big deal. Like they're New York Times
Oh
and
yeah.
the Sunday Star Ledger and all this. So I'd get up and I'd work for 2, 3 hours and put all the newspapers together because people would come in and get their newspapers, and then I'd work until like about 11 or in the morning or noon. But I'd stay at her house the night before because her house was attached to the store. I would just read all the comics that were in the rack because she had a spinner rack. But even before
Right.
that, I remember I would go visit her store. I was about 12 when I started working there. So before that, I would just go in and grab all the comics I want, take them in the back, read them, and then put them back on the rack.
Okay. Nice.
So yeah, but so New Teen Titans number 4 was the first one, and then I fell in love. But my favorite comic of all time, my favorite individual single issue is New Teen Titans number 38, which is the Who is Donna Troy issue.
Right.
It is my favorite single comic. It is such a perfect example of detective work from the heart. It's smart, it's interesting, it takes you down a bunch of different paths. There's a page that George put like 20 panels on because it's just panel doing the motion. Technically gorgeous, but there's a particular scene in it where I'm just gonna tell you. So Donna Troy, the whole purpose of this story is that Donna Troy doesn't remember anything before Wonder Woman picking her up in a burning apartment in her first origin, and that's how she went to Themyscira and became Wonder Girl. So she asks the greatest detective in the world, Robin, to help her find her true origins. She goes through this process. At one point in her young life before that happened, she was adopted by a family, and she didn't know that. He finds the adopted people, and Donna, who's now in her early 20s, runs across the grass to her adoptive mother that she hasn't seen since for a very long time, and they hug. And the leaves flip up off the grass and they embrace, and you can feel the impact of these two women holding each other in this beautiful embrace. And it stayed with me for years and years. It's so iconic and so memorable. That Are you familiar with Phil Jimenez?
Yes.
Well, I guess it's about 7 years ago now. I can't keep track of time anymore. But when DC was doing something called Rebirth, he did a lot of work in the Rebirth special edition that kind of kicked off their newest relaunch or whatever it is. And there's a scene where Wally West, the Flash, had been gone for some time. He was in the Speed Force and he was calling out, and he finally Barry remembers enough, and Wally comes out, and Wally West and Barry Allen, two Flashes, hug. And when I saw that panel, I texted Phil and I said, "Hey," I sent him a picture of the panel from DT Titans 38. I'm like, "Hey, this is where this comes from." So,
Wow. That's
so yeah,
nice.
that's the power of comics.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There's so much. My dad was in the army, so we moved around a lot. And I learned very quickly that if you made friends, in 6 months, they're going to be stationed somewhere else. Their
mhm.
dad's going to move away or their mom. But comic books and books didn't leave you.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so they were for a lot of times. And my mom, till the day she passed, would say, "You just put Jesse Wayne in a room with a book and he's fine." And there's
Mhm.
a lot of truth to that.
Sure.
There is a lot of truth.
I
Yeah,
want you said you're a Legion fan. I'm a huge Legion. Did you read through what did you read 5 years later arc? What's your
I
opinion of
did.
that? A fan of that?
I love that arc.
This is my
I
favorite.
I just
I will say it is my favorite. If you take one through about 29, like 30, my
yeah,
favorite 30 issues are volume four from 1 to 30.
yeah,
I like other things. There's some things that are maybe more poignant or I like a little bit better, but smaller. When Projectra executes Nemesis Kid, one of my favorite
yeah,
things. I am the authority here, and this is my role.
yeah,
So he dies. This cur does not get to live because he
yeah,
took my life from me.
yeah,
That was brutal.
yeah,
But, and I'll tell you, we talked about Terry Moore.
yeah,
Were we, I don't know if we were recording that or not, but so before Terry was writing Strangers in Paradise,
yeah,
that the Legion of Superheroes Volume 4, which is known among fans as the 5 years later arc,
yeah,
there is a story that happens in there where Lightning Lass, who's Isla Rance, and Salu Digby, who is Shrinking Violet, are a same sex couple.
right.
They are the first same sex couple in DC Comics. It is never acknowledged. DC does not acknowledge this.
No.
It does not, is never, they never kiss, but anybody who reads it knows it. And so
Yeah,
I talked to Keith Giffen a couple of times.
yeah,
A couple of times I had the opportunity to talk to him. And I really wanted to talk to him and go deeper into it, but I did get this opportunity and I said, "Hey, no, I really loved what you did with them." And his response to me, and if you've ever met Keith Giffen, he was the curmudgeon's curmudgeon. He was a uh, grizzly old guy, especially in the last 10, 15 years of his life,
yeah,
and didn't care about anybody else's opinions of anything and was just rough, but
yeah.
a sweet person and underneath it all. And I said, "I really love that you did that." And he looked at me and he's like, "We got away with it."
Ha 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 ha.
And it's true. So I've written a story. There is a story on Pop Culture Squad about going into details about that. And the thing about it is part of my life, my mom had a relationship with a woman at one point in my life. It was wonderful to me to see that was just fine. That everybody else could experience that too. Not that I felt bad about it or embarrassed or anything like that. It was normal to me that my mom
Sure.
was had that relationship, but I wanted other people to know that it was normal too.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah, no, I understand that power and the it is. there so many times that creative people have pushed those limits and pushed that the universe that it is I'm always laughing at people who and it's a little bit better now, but calling comics kid stuff. There certainly is plenty of kids comics and I grew up watching them, but there's a lot of great writing happening in it.
Oh, sure.
How did you start covering this? When did you start doing this for a
I'll tell you,
gig?
I'll tell you that the person who owns Pop Culture Squad is a woman named Adrienne Nash, and her
Yeah,
dad is Mike Gold. I met Adrienne 10 years ago. It was 2014 at the
yeah.
Harvey Awards at Baltimore Comic Con. My wife and I had bought tickets to the Harvey Awards and we sat down, and Adrienne was walking around looking for a place to sit. And my wife, as she does, says, please sit with us. And
Hmm.
so we don't know this woman from anything. And we talked and we were just talking about comics and it was great. And she said, oh, yeah, my dad runs a website, Comic Mix and whatever, and whatnot. She neglected to say that her dad was Mike Gold and that he helped influence a lot of who I am in the comics that he was responsible for. We went on. We became Facebook friends for a while later, and we struck up a friendship. And there was a
Yeah.
point where I had gone to Baltimore Comic Con, I had a conversation with John Workman, who is a legendary letterer, also was the art director for heavy metal for probably about 5 years in the late 70s, early 80s.
Hmm.
Brilliant person. But I had a conversation with him. He told me a story about comic books that I felt needed to be out there. And Adrian was working for Comic Mix and we had talked. And I'm like, I really think that I would like to write this up. I would like to write this story that he told me up because I think
Sure.
people need to hear it. And right about that time, she was leaving Comic Mix. She felt that Comic Mix still exists, but it's not what it was. Mike had had enough, and for whatever internal things happened there, he left. Adrian left, and she's, I think I'm just gonna start my own thing. I'm like, okay, I was about to ask you, how do I get Comic Mix? So between her and I and her co-founder, Mark Fishman, we started Pop Culture Squad. One of the first things I wrote was that story. My column is continued after the next page because I'm a lettering nerd.
Hmm.
But I'll share the story and people a little bit of the story. John had told me that, you know, back in the 80s when he was lettering Thor and Walt Simonson was writing and drawing it, Walter had come over to visit him. Walter and Louise Simonson were living in New York up in the Upper West Side, and John was living in Hazlet, New Jersey. And Walter and Louise would took the bus over to come and have lunch or whatever it was with John and his wife Kathy. And Walter, the bus ride was pretty good. It was pretty quick. We're sending the pages back and forth through FedEx. It takes at
Yeah.
least a day. John used the term federal, so he aged
Yeah.
himself a little,
Yeah.
but it takes a day at least. What if we just put the pages on the bus and buy a ticket? So they went down and they figured it out. So for a lot of those pages, John would go home. John would letter the page. Walter was not a complete penciler. He would just
Right.
put ideas about what was going to be where. And then John would letter those pages and send them back to him. And then Walter would go and ink everything in,
Right.
put everything where it belongs. He put enough so that John knew where to put the dialogue.
Right.
And so he would take the pages, put them in a box or whatever, go to the bus station and buy a bus ticket, then go home, get on the call up Walter and say, hey, it's on this bus. It's coming in at this time. Walter would take a train down to Penn Station or to Port Authority and pick it up. And so that was my first article, first thing that I wanted to get out there. And then I'm like, let me talk to some more people. I think the first person I interviewed just for an interview, John and I have a long friendship, and I have a lot of stuff that I've recorded for him, and I've done a couple much longer pieces. Dean Haspiel was the first person that I interviewed for a regular interview, and then I just started setting up more and doing other interviews with people. It started going to shows, they started giving me press passes, and I wanted to. I think maybe I can help with Baltimore Comic Con, which is my home show. Maybe I could do panels if you need some help, and they were happy to have me there. And
Hmm.
now that's part of my yearly process. And the podcast happened, the Squadcast, the way we do it on a weekly basis was that Mike had told me, Mike and I, Mike writes for Pop Culture Squad as well. And I edit his column, which is very weird to me that I am
Hmm.
editing him.
Yeah.
He told me one time, he's, hey, some people from Chicago, a comic shop asked me if I wanted to be on a podcast. I think it was probably Challengers, but I'm not 100% sure. And he said, I like that idea. I like to talk a lot, but I'd rather do it with you. And I said, I've been waiting for you to say this, so let's figure out how to do it. Took us about a year of talking about what we wanted to do, and I said, screw it. So we just went live, and we've been doing it for a year and almost 2 years now, pretty close to almost
Nice.
2 years. We have a bunch of great guests, and we have a lot of fun. Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. I really enjoy it. Keeps me going.
Who's on your, because often I'll ask what songs are you still chasing, right? Like on a live
Yeah,
show. But I'm going to
sure.
ask you, what guests are you haven't been able to get yet that you're wanting?
I can answer this a couple of ways. I was very lucky that some of the luminaries currently writing and drawing in comics have become friends of mine. Tom King and I have been friends for 10 years now. We talked yesterday and the day before. Like yesterday, at the show, I said, "Hey, you're done. Let's go find some planetary art and look at it because I know where it is. Let's go look. There's some original pieces." And he's, "Okay, cool. Let's go check it." And he's, "Oh man, this is from issue three.
Yeah.
It's the Tokyo issue, the one where everything changes and gets really weird." And I saw those pages and they were
Mhm.
crazy. There are people that I would like to get on, particularly a lot of the female writers out there who I think are fantastic. They're not super available in for ways for me to contact them. I'd love to talk to Kelly Thompson. I know people who have talked to her, but I'd love to have her on and talk to her.
Mhm.
There's some other people who we've back and forth with. I have some plans to get some other people. Um, but yeah, actually Terry Moore, we just talked about the other day, and he's going to come on the show
Good.
sometime soon. We always like to do things where people have something to talk about that helps them.
Yeah.
People are busy. If they have something that they want to talk about or promote, we're happy to have them on, talk
Yeah.
about it. But yeah, I never got a chance to have the conversation that I wanted to with George. I have a piece of art of his, and I have a picture with him that he drew for us. I paid $25 for a head sketch in late 2014, and which was
That
Wonder Woman.
he was at Alex's show, right? Comic
Sure.
Palooza,
Yeah.
and he sits there with his marker
Hmm.
and just doing sketches, right? Doing incredibly inexpensive, I'm sure, for a charity. I brought him my Doctor Who sketchbook that Tom
Okay.
had started for me. And I said, what do you want to draw? I said, it's a Doctor Who sketchbook. I said, how about Kara and a Fez? Yes! And so he sketched Kara Zor-El in a fez with a bow tie, saying bow ties are cool. And it just was wonderful. I was thrilled.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife has a Batgirl sketchbook that Tom started for her. Um, Comics are important. My wife is a huge comic fan as well, and we
Yeah.
do this together. We volunteer for Hero Initiative, and if you don't know what that is, it's a nonprofit organization that raises money and distributes money to comic book professionals who are down on their luck, who need some medical help, who need some other financial help because they are not W-2 employees where they have a pension or health insurance. We volunteer for them quite a bit over the year. And that's important. But she's a huge fan. And when we got married, I bought her wedding gift from me was the first issue of Wonder Woman when she was born,
Oh, how nice.
which is Wonder Woman 199. And anybody who likes comics and is listening knows what that issue is. It's the famous Jeffrey Catherine Jones issue cover where she's in a very, very famous bondage situation where her arms are up and she's looking down at like this white shift. It's when Denny O'Neil was writing it, she didn't have her powers. And it's very famous. So that was
Hmm.
her wedding gift. And I wrote my vows, pasted them to a comic book board and put the board in a bag with the comic. I read it from that and then handed it to her. It was very romantic, so it was pretty cool. But
That
yeah,
is very
she was a
cool.
huge Wonder Woman fan. She's a huge Batgirl fan. She loves Poison Ivy. She's
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun to be able to share that and have somebody in your life who you can share that type of
Yeah.
that love with.
So what's next for you, Bob?
I'm a freelance editor. There's two projects I'm working on. We probably hear about them in the next 6 months or so. I can't really talk about them because they're
Sure.
not mine, but one of them is really cool. It's a lot of fun. I like the work of an editor. I love working with people on making comics because as you read comics with a critical eye, things and you want to make sure that those things are done. And people tell interesting stories. One of them is a standard editing thing, like, you know, proofread the script, make sure that things work and pages work and people are being named particularly well and that things, all those typical comic things happen. And that is probably, we're far away on pages, but probably sometime next year it'll get kickstarted. And the other one is much more of a work where I'm involved in story design and that we've got over half of the first issue already drawn. So probably early next year we'll kickstart that.
So I often use this phrase to because there certainly is a cross section of music fans and comic fans, but I will also bring up to music fans, I said there is a common phrase that every comic is someone's first comic.
Yep,
And so therefore you have to make it very inviting. I said, and remember, every Bruce Springsteen show is someone's first
it
Springsteen show.
was. Yeah.
And you may have heard Born to Run 30 times, but think about that first person going to their show. They got to hear Born to Run, right?
Oh yeah. Listen, it was
Okay.
great though. Come
Yeah,
on. If you're not familiar with his set list, and we close out, but it's great. Like he does about 20 songs or so,
yeah.
and he ends it with Thunder Road. And then there's this thing called it's not really an encore. He says thanks and turns off the lights, and then turns the lights right back on, and then goes right
Yes.
into Born to Run. And so it's just fun. Did
Yeah.
you gave me homework. Are we gonna get to that point?
Yeah, we are. We're going to in a minute.
I forget because
Yeah, I want to
I
do.
have
Yeah, I want to hear your. So, a couple of things I made notes of. I will see your band being better at Atlantic City to, I think Johnny Cash's version of Highway Patrolman is better than Bruce's version.
okay.
So, if you haven't heard that, check
I'm
out
gonna go
Johnny
listen.
Cash.
I know it off the top of my head, but I'm gonna find it now.
Have you read Warren Zane's Deliver Me from Nowhere, The Making of Nebraska?
No, not
It reads like a mystery novel, Bob.
it. I can see that. That doesn't surprise me that someone would
Yeah,
write a book that way about that album. I know a
yeah,
decent amount about the album was made
yeah.
are that way.
And so basically, the premise is why did After the River and commercial success for the first time, and then Born in the USA, which goes crazy, why did he need to take that step back before he did another one? So it's a really fascinating book. So yeah, I recommend, and there is a PBS documentary going on currently that has him reading excerpts from the book and Lucinda Williams and Emmylou Harris doing songs from Nebraska. So that's good.
Okay, I will
Bob,
read it.
I feel like we could talk another 2 hours. I've kept you way too long, but I'm going to give you a chance to say final words in a minute. But I do end every podcast with what I call the Mary question. And if you are a fan of Bob's because of his work and for the podcast and the website, thank you for checking out Set Lusting Bruce. Jay Armstrong is from the Philadelphia area. He is a retired honors English teacher. When he was teaching, he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would read it as if it was a poem. They would just talk about Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. They would talk about the theme Bruce explores, the imagery he builds, and then he was asked his class at the end of the day, does Mary get in the car? So that's the setup, Bob. Your homework was to listen to it and come up with your opinion. Do you think Mary gets in the car?
Mary gets in the car.
Okay.
I will tell you that when I got your email, I was sitting next to Tom. And so we talked about it, but it doesn't matter. My opinion was that Mary gets in the car and Wendy gets in the car and Rosie comes out. There's this theme of these sad romantic situations. There's always this conflict there. And I think that was a recurrent theme in the 70s of
Hmm.
music. There was this thing like, would they, won't they? I need you, come to me. And yeah, I think Mary gets in the car, and I think Wendy gets in the car, and I think Rosie comes out because that is the vibe that I get from Bruce. But I will tell you that Roberta does not have time.
Any final thoughts before I let you out of here? And
Oh
how
man,
can people reach you?
I've had a great time. Thanks so much for doing this, Jesse. Thanks for having me on. You can find us at popculturesquad.com. On all socials, we're at Pop Culture Squad. It's just one word, Pop Culture Squad. You can hit me there on Twitter. If you do Pop Culture Squad, you'll find us. And we're on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and Blue Sky and everything.
Bob, this was a blast. I hope you had fun. You're welcome. And now I'm going to give you the same option you talk about when you have something to promote and you want to come back, or you just want to, after you read Warren Zane's book and go, hey, Jesse, I need to talk about this, reach out and we'll do this again. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
All right. Listeners, go check out the website, check out the podcast. Remember to be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to Set Lusting Bruce. I hope you enjoyed our discussion of music, and I also hope you check out other episodes of the podcast. I've spent over 7 years talking to hundreds of music fans from around the world about the power and the magic of music. Please follow me on my socials. I'm still on Twitter, aka X, at Jesse Jackson DFW. The show is at Set Lusting Bruce. The show and I both still have a Facebook page. Please go there and like us. I'm part of a few other podcasts. On Perfectly Good Podcast, me and my co-host Sylvan are talking about every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. Set Lusting Bruce and Perfectly Good Podcast are part of the Pantheon Podcast Network, where we have hundreds of shows dedicated to music. Please check them out. My good friend Charles and I talk all things Doctor Who on Next Stop Everywhere, discussing the latest episode of House of the Dragon. And each week, Lou, Karen, and I talk about Babylon 5 and other pop culture topics on Last Best Hope for Conversation, part of the JKL Media podcast family. I would love to hear your feedback. Please send me an email at setlustingbruce@gmail.com. You can leave a voicemail, 469-249-2442. Give me your thoughts. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you dislike. Hook me up with someone you think would be a great guest. Getting to talk to people about music and other creative endeavors is my passion. And I hope that these conversations bring you a little joy, a little peace, and a whole lot of love.